Welcome back to Coach Connect. Here's where we explore stories, and strategies, and insights from trailblazers who are transforming the world of coaching and well-being. What drives their success? What fuels their passion for helping others? We're here to uncover their secrets and share them with you. So this show is brought to you by Vibely.io, the all-in-one coaching platform designed to empower coaches with tools, resources, and supports they need to thrive and help their clients achieve meaningful, long-lasting growth. I'm Dr. Diego Salinas, your guide on this journey. As a neuroscientist and health coach and co-founder of Vibely, I'm committed to celebrating the incredible work of coaches everywhere and helping them unlock their full potential. So together, let's dive in deep into what makes coaching powerful and a force of change. So today, I'm proud to introduce our first guest, Laura Timbrook. Laura, she's an international speaker, a board-certified health and wellness coach, and a leading expert in corporate wellness, particularly in the manufacturing and shift work sectors. With over a decade of experience, she's established herself as an authority in wellness strategies tailored to fit shift workers. Laura created the NBHWC approved Shift HC course, setting standards for professional development and supporting the shift work population. Her work aims to bridge the wellness gap for this underserved community. She's also the host of the Shift Health Coach podcast, offering valuable advice for health professionals and shift workers alike, giving them tools and strategies for their healthiest habits. Currently writing her second book, Coaching the Night Shift, Laura continues to explore solutions for shift workers and wellness. Her first book, Plate of Food, focused primarily on promoting healthy, nourishing meals. With over 20 years of experience in leadership, employment, and wellness, Laura's integrative approach enhances individual being and organizational productivity. As a strong advocate for wellness and critical elements of effective leadership, Laura remains a trailblazer in health and wellness for shift workers and beyond. So Laura, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And I have always screwed up the shift health coach. There is too many H's in that. It drives me nuts.
Anyone who knows me knows I mumble my whole life, so this is nothing new. It's on me. So Laura, I want to start off by saying, curious kind of how you got started working with this population. I think coaching is really nice because there's so much variety, but I don't know anyone else who focuses on workers who have that particular difference in shift work. So curious how you got started working with this population.
Yeah, I actually kind of fell into it essentially. I was doing corporate wellness and I was a contract employee. So I would go to all kinds of different organizations. And, early on, we would do like pharmaceutical manufacturing, which is still manufacturing, but I like to call it like the white collar manufacturing. Like
Mm.
it's a little bit more of around your corporate office type. And then one day, just by happenstance, I was sent to this one organization and I researched them. I assumed it was going to be their corporate office I was being sent to. And I even took a picture driving down the road because it was like the prettiest road, their driveway into this place. I was like, oh my God, this is like, I love my life. And then the trees opened up and it's just concrete, gravel, and like metal. It's a big manufacturing facility. There is no corporate office. There was no front door. There was like the cement barriers that you see on the highways, like protecting the cars from the 18 wheelers coming in and out. And
Mm.
I was just like, where am I? And I ended up, it was a 2 day event that we were doing. And really, through that 2 day event, really opened my eyes to what shift work was, the struggles that they happened to have. Um, there was so much conversation that was happening that day that really, that old saying, like sometimes your eyes get opened and you can't, like, you can't unknow it now. And
Mm.
that's essentially what was happening. Like, I saw the world at a different angle and I couldn't just turn my back against it. Like, I had to, so many of these people, they just were giving up hope on being healthy, um, that I just couldn't look away from it.
Wow. Yeah, you painted quite a picture there, kind of seeing like that industrial look and kind of they're almost part of the system now. What's the point of even giving up? I'm part of the machine here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the guys, he sat in front of me and a lot of them were kind of reluctant to even talk to me. I was totally dressed wrong day one. So I'm coming in thinking it's a corporate office. I got my little black dress on. I got my wheelie cart with all my displays, and here I'm walking into just something totally opposite of what I was dressed for. I came back the second day in like Doc Martens and jeans and a flannel, and everything went much better.
Mm.
But one of the guys that he really had a conversation with me, and I was so thankful for him to really talk to me. He had high blood pressure issues, and during the event, we were doing biometrics and everything like that. So he knew where his biometrics were going to sit, and he was talking to me, and he's like, "Listen," he's like, "I know all this. My doctor gave me the Mediterranean diet to follow." He goes, "But it just doesn't work for me." He's like, "I know exactly what I should be eating." He goes, "But you know what?" He goes, "I wake up at 5 p.m." He goes, "My first meal," he goes, "am I eating oatmeal or tacos with the family?" And I was just like, at that point, I was like, "Oh my goodness. I don't know what to like." My jaw was probably on the table.
Mm.
I, I was speechless because it was like I never thought of that before. Like when a 9 to 5er goes to the doctor and they're like, "Oh, here, follow this eating plan." Not to say it's easy, but we understand the very basics: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. But when you're working on the flip side of daytime, everything's different. You don't get the traditional lunch break. I mean, they have a lunch break, but it's usually 30 minutes and it may or may not happen. And, it's all up in the air, but it's just, it's so different. So I really saw, that most of the health and wellness advice, it's made for the 9 to 5 workforce. It's made for those people that can live and follow the sun. It's not made for somebody that their schedules rotate, or they're on the opposite side of daytime. It's really difficult for this population.
Yeah, I mean, saying breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We said, what is breakfast even, right? If we're working at 5 p.m., is it breakfast, is it lunch? That even that we take for granted that the common advice we give, really, how can we, it's not even the same definitions. And it sounds like it's really, what else,
Right.
Laura, do you think people misunderstand about working with shift workers? So, like, that's one easy example to think of. All right, food and what the time. What else do you think is unique challenges they face that are not really addressed by traditional system?
Yeah, one of the interesting ones I've just been starting to learn over the last probably 2 years is our stress management techniques.
Mm.
When we talk about breathing, some of these folks that I work with are in such dangerous positions. Maybe they're police officers and they don't know what they're walking into, or they're working with high voltage power lines. Like a lot of times we talk about mindfulness is, breathing and relaxing ourselves to go into a situation. If my life is on the line and I'm about to touch a high power line, I can't be relaxed. I have to be on my A game. Like I want to actually be in that stress scenario. Like I want to be laser focused that I'm not accidentally going to touch the wrong thing or pick up the wrong screwdriver that's not insulated,
Mm.
and now I'm over. So I think a lot of times when we talk about that, it becomes so difficult for them to understand. I was doing a stress seminar one time, and the guy looked at me. He goes, "I'm not into yoga mats and twinkle lights." And I was just like, "Oh my goodness, we a lot of times we present it in a different visual point, right? That relaxing is, sitting in a lotus pose in a dark room, but these guys are, you're working with a 350-pound diesel mechanic. He's not going to be in a lotus position in a dark room. But when we start talking about stress management, a lot of times we'll talk about motorcycle riding or fishing. Fishing is by hands down my favorite, because these are all really awesome mindfulness practices, and it relates to them. And more than anything, it's something at the end of a hard day. Maybe you're super frustrated, you're super burnt out because your brain has been had to be online all the time. To be able on your way home to take 20 minutes, maybe pull over at your favorite creek and toss a couple lines before you can get home. You can get that frustration out. You can be in nature. There's so much benefits about being in nature. And it's something they love. It's not having to add something else to their day. So I think when we look at stress management practices or mindfulness practices, we have to look at the person as a whole and what attracts them and what feels right and authentic to them.
Yeah, we talk a lot of coaching about meeting our clients where they're at, but I think we see some coaches who are starting off saying, well, all right, meet them where they're at to take them to this one place, to take them to the 9 to 5 schedule. Meet them where they're at so I can take them to the yoga poses, right? And that's actually missing the point of meeting where they're at. It's meeting where they're at and going where they want to go. You mentioned stress management. I'm talking to all my clients about this concept of restoration. So there's passive restoration, going to sleep, getting your the rest, which could be an issue for sleep shift workers, but also active restoration, right? There's some things that actually take energy to do. Going fishing, for me, it's going rollerblading. Maybe for someone, it's going skydiving. They take energy to do, but they give you some sort of restoration, some sort of peace internally. And there's so many ways to be mindful. It's not only this traditional the Instagram mindfulness of someone doing this and then lotus pose, like you mentioned, right? So it's not like meeting where they're at, but actually following them on their journey as well. Versus otherwise, it can be very, I think it's well intentioned, but then people were still doing the old model. We're just trying to pull them back to this unrealistic standard of health and well being. It's not, then we're going to lose their engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things that we do is we do talk about breath work because I think breath work has a really good um, area, especially when it comes to shift work. It can be really easily done, but we have to, again, meet them where they're at, allow it to feel like they can do it. So, for a lot of these times, generally what I do is we practice two different types of breathing techniques. We try the 4-7-8 breathing, and we go through 2 or 3 sessions, 2 or 3 rounds of that. And then we do the box breathing. And of course, all the guys normally are more into the box breathing because you talk about like the SEALs and they're like, oh, the SEAL team does it. Like this is what it is. And it was funny because I was doing it for a community center. So there was a couple of police officers in, and a lot of times I'll preference this by saying, I want you to try this breathing and let me know how you feel. And then we're going to try this type of breathing. Because a lot of times, the moment you say breath work, they immediately think like this soft skill. And it's like, no, 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 let's just try it. And one of the things that they've learned is that when they do the box breathing, they get zoned in. So now I'm going up on that high tension tower. I'm going to touch a line that I hope to God they turned off.
Mm.
You know, I could do the box breathing. It's gonna laser focus me. And one guy one time when he was doing it, he's like, I feel like my peripheral vision just got tighter. Like I was so zoned in, even on my vision. And it was just really interesting. So we do things like that and we kind of relate it to their situation. Or if somebody in the diesel mechanic shop's ready to lose his mind and throw something across the room, we talk about the 4-7-8 breathing. Let's just count it out,
Yeah.
and it's things like that. And as long as we can relate it to their life, and a lot of times they will all laugh because anybody that's ever worked in a mechanic shop has thrown something across the room.
Yeah, I think a little humor there is important too, right? We're actually being realistic in what they want and actually ask them, what are your goals? And see how these can be tools to reach their goals. And for me and some of my client work, when I teach them about some of these breathing techniques, I like to help to demystify it. That 4-7-8 breath. I go, there's actually a physiological reason why it's going to lower your heart rate. It's not just only kumbaya. It's actually this intrathoracic pressure gets increased. So your biggest nerve will get squeezed. That biggest nerve will, your heart rate goes slower. Heart rate slower calms you down. And kind of differentiating how the breath can be mindful, not, just looking at the breath, observing it, or it can be intentional, box breathing, 4-7-8. And maybe for your kind of workers that hit even harder than people I serve, I say, my job is to give you the tools. I'm at the Home Depot. We're going to give you a bunch of tools, but you might have a huge tool shed, but you may not use every single tool for every single job. Right? A carpenter may not always use the same screwdriver or hammer for every single job, but you want to have them all available so that you can adapt on the fly, right? And that there's so many vehicles to become. You mentioned mindfulness earlier. I think a lot of people think being present, right? People often describe it in a similar way. I'm in the zone. It's kind of like you mentioned, the world disappears around me. You know, there's that time dilation, the kind of time slows down or speeds up. There's a feeling of being present. And you could be talking to someone who's the grandma who's crocheting or the 25-year-old who's skydiving. They both achieve that same state, but through their own natural way. And I think a lot of it, as I say to my clients, we're going to run experiments here. I don't know what's going to happen. Here's a few ways of breathing. Why don't you tell me if it works for you or not? And then that's really how you get much more engagement, which is not just us being paternalistic, but offering different tools and saying only you know what works best with your life and your brain and your body.
Yeah. And you made a really good point before about talking about meeting clients where they're at. And that was one of the things that, as we're trained as health coaches, this is drilled into our heads. Meet them where they're at, meet them where they're at. But you made a really good point that sometimes when we say meet them where they're at, we're really wanting to take them to a certain place. And that was something that I really had to unlearn when working with this population, because there was a lot of things that in the quote unquote healthy world, we would be like, oh my God, you can't do that. Ooh, you're smoking. Like, we have to address that. Like, that's number one. We have to address that. But I realized if I even said the word smoking, I was chasing them off. We looked past it. I didn't even care. Like, it wasn't even a topic on the table to have. And I think as health and wellness professionals, sometimes that can be really difficult. And I tried to remind myself, I have to come from this area of there is no judgment. If you want to focus on your blood pressure and you want to focus on it because you just want to change the way you're eating, then that's where we're going to do. I'm not even going to mention the fact that quitting smoking can lower your blood pressure, because I'm chasing them away. I'm then, in their eyes, part of the problem, part of you're going to give us solutions that doesn't fit my lifestyle. Because one of the things, and as a former smoker, I never made this connection. When we're having someone giving up smoking, they're giving up a lot more than just smoking. They're giving up a space to walk away from work. In some of our shift working clients, this is critical. It's so hard if a nurse on the floor was like, I just need 5 minutes from a mental health break. The other nurses are going to be like, are you kidding me? We're drowning over here. You can't have a break. But when she says, I have to go have a cigarette, everyone's like, oh my God, go, go, go. We take care of you. But that doesn't happen if you don't smoke. So there is so much of a bigger issue we have to address that a lot of times they're not ready, and we just sideline it until maybe when they are, and maybe never. Maybe that's not my role as a coach to address that.
Yeah, you mentioned unlearning things, having to go from medicine with this model. Like, here's a solution, here's a test answer. What's the health thing to do next, right? And when someone comes in smoking, it's let's tell them why it's bad, or they have diabetes. Let's tell them why their eyes are going to stop working, and their kidneys are going to fail, and their feet are going to fall off. All right, most people already know that. First of all, that's not new information, and we're just kind of going against them. And instead of looking at a person as a set of behaviors, be like, well, this single mom of three who has two jobs and like smoking is her only stress management tool. How am I going to take that away without giving her other stress management tools? Right.
Yeah.
And you, besides we're turning them away. We're not meeting where they're at. It's yeah. People say, well, my smoking is my socialization. It's okay knowing what those functions are and if and when they're ready to work on this. And if I can share a quick story to remind me of Laura, when I was training for trying to get sessions done to take my national board exam, a friend of a friend was like, okay, yeah, I'll do one of your sessions with you. Why not? Do a micro session, right? So I went to this person's house and did a long session, like an hour and a half, right? I'll start trying. So I go, hey, look at the wheel of health. What do you want to work on? And he said, well, you're a health coach, so I guess I have to work on smoking cessation. I'm quitting vaping. And I said, what do you actually want to work on? And the guy's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know, decide. You go wherever you want. And he's like, I can work on anything? And so we looked at his wheel of health, and long story short, he was a real estate agent, but was passionate about music. I went to his house, and he had his bedroom and his two rooms. One's a studio, one's a practice room, like a band practice room. And he's like, I had a CD that I want to work for my sister. I've been doing since last year, and I just can't finish it. And I would love to like finish the CD. Can you work on that? I'm like, we can work on any process. Let's behavior it out. So we had this long session, and I play guitar, so we nerded out music theory and recording equipment and all that during the brainstorm. Long story short, the plan was to write in his living room, the only room in his house that wasn't related to music because there's sunlight in there. And that was just one session. A few months later, he gave me a text. He's like, hey, Dr. Salinas, guess what? I quit vaping. Right? Like if you were the clients, and I think also I tell people we're one whole system. I think we often see that when the system is grinding, speaking mechanics, right? I'm like, oh man, work is going hard and my partner just left and oh, I'm not sure what to do with my kid. Like when it's all coming to a head. But I say this just shows that it's all correlated. The whole work life and home life, I say it's the same cells going to both situations. It's not different cells. So we often notice a correlation when they're going negatively, but it also means they're correlated, they could be the opposite direction. So we can work on any part of the system that will help make improvements to any part of the system. For him, it's working on his music, working on his mental well-being, stress management, smoke less smoking, right? So there's any way you can make an improvement will eventually make an improvement in the rest of the system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting. Before you said, sleep must be hard for shift workers, and that is by far one of the biggest issues, the biggest hurdles we face when it comes to shift work. There's such this built-in mindset of I'll sleep when I'm dead,
Mm.
and getting them to acknowledge that, hey, if we don't prioritize sleep, that ladder is going to come true a lot quicker.
Mm.
Like there's ways that we can do it, and a lot of times too, if we prioritize sleep, everything else becomes so much easier. you know um, Working with this population, and even throughout my whole career, I've never met a person who didn't want to be healthy. Like I've never met someone that was like, nope, nope, don't want to be healthy. I have met so many people that really at their core believed healthy wasn't achievable given their lifestyle. And the same thing comes from sleep. I see so many people that are like, nope, I can function on 4 hours of sleep and I am good to go. And a lot of times we'll challenge that. And, we have a sleep seminar we do, and we'll have them for like 2 weeks just kind of chart out and try to get a little bit more sleep. If they don't, they don't, but at least chart it out, let's say. And every time they get like, I don't know, 30, 40 more minutes of sleep, all of a sudden they're like, their happy face gets a little happier, right? Because we do happy faces based on how they feel, kind of like the medical pain chart. We
Yeah.
like to see, and it's often, yeah, it's often interesting because what they start learning is what they thought was feeling good is, oh no, there's another level of feeling good. And one of the biggest problems we run into with sleep is the current sleep advice. So if you go to any sleep website, number one on the list, go to bed the same time every night. You're talking to a police officer, you're talking to a rotating shift worker, a doctor, a nurse works on rotations. It's completely impossible. So we wonder why they're not getting more sleep. It's because they can't do step one. If they can't do step one, let's put it this way. We have doctors and nurses that fully understand the importance of sleep. They will talk till they're blue in the faces to their clients about it. And yet themselves can't get more to 4 to 5 hours of sleep because they just really at a core believe it's not possible.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. So I have the medical background. I remember being in residency, and to your point, this is great stories coming to mind. So I was working the ER one of these times, and ER sporadic shifts. So I was doing night calls with different hours, and I remember being after 5 nights in a row. And I'm nocturnal. Let's talk about also chronotyping in a second as well. But I'm definitely more of a nocturnal. So I was like, oh, night shifts, that's not bad. I can stay up late. After 5 days of 12-hour shifts, and these are stressful, chaotic, the alarm is going off, this and this, and you think, oh, I'm so tired, I'll sleep when I'm home. It's like this weird combination where you're exhausted, but you still can't fall asleep, right? That adrenaline is going, or the sun is out, or people next door are playing music, whatever it is, right? By the fifth day, you can tell that smiley face is definitely gone down to the one or two. And I remember leaving, it was Friday morning. It's like, I'm finally done. I'm gonna sleep this whole weekend, right? I'm trying to walk to the parking lot, and my director's like, Diego, hold on a second. You gotta go to the noon conference. And we have noon conferences that you're required to go, but you can miss some because when you're overnight, they expect you to miss them. I was like, I'm missing this one. I gotta go home. She's like, no, no. This one's required to go. And there were 2 in the year that were required for doctors to go. One was on medical malpractice and one was on sleep from the American Medical Association. You have to sign in with your badge. And I was like, can't I just go home and sleep? They're like, no, you have to go to this lecture about how important sleep is. And I'm like, this system is gaslighting me here, right? But so whatever, I couldn't leave. And so I tried to go to the call room for a few hours because it was like 8 in the morning at that point. Lecture was at noon. I tried to go to the call room and sleep. I couldn't sleep because again, people are outside talking. I'm just stressed out. Noon conference comes around. I am just dragging, feeling like death. My body's giving up on me, and I'm there. The lecture, as you mentioned, was given by a surgeon who's like, "Oh, I just finished my 36-hour call." I'm like, "Does no one appreciate the irony here?" And the first slide is about how not sleeping is bad for your health. Let's put it that way, and the chronic effects of not getting good sleep. And I was like, this lecture is literally killing me. Right? And then the advice was like, oh, when you can, try to take a nap. And I was like, I just with the frustration of this, right? And I vowed that if I ever give wellness talks, which I do, I go, listen, I don't know where you're going right now in your life. Here's my cell phone. Go take a nap if you need to. I'm not going to solve your problems in an hour. There's some good solutions on how to get started, but you're going to need to adapt to them. And along those lines too, Laura, that 4-hour sleep, I realized after residency, I got really good at functioning on a certain few hours of sleep. If I got 2, 3, 4 hours, I can then work for another 4 or 5 or 6. I wasn't healthy though, right? And then I took even after I left, it took my body a few months to even be able to regulate sleep in a different way. So even the goalpost, what's expected, is so different. We're not even addressing what do you do if it's not possible. And I guess last thing about this, in coaching, we talk about stages of change, right? Pre-contemplation, contemplation. You said earlier, there's no hope, right? If the goal is to sleep the same hour every day, and I know my work, I don't know what next week's schedule is going to be like because that's when it's posted on Monday. I'm pre-contemplative. I can give up on trying because it's never going to be possible to fit that standard. So much wisdom there.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh my God, there's so many good points in this. You know, just I like how you talked about functioning. There is a pretty famous study, and I actually took it from the National Institute of Occupational Safety, and they give it to all their nurses. And I'm not a nurse, but I've taken the training, and they talk about one specific study. They studied 50,000 medical professionals. Some were given 6 hours of sleep, the other 7 hours of sleep. I think it was like a 50-minute sleep difference. And they noticed a significant amount of medical mistakes or near medical mistakes from those that slept the 6 hours versus the 7 hours. 50 minutes. And it's that. So it's just, and they have this data. And, you talked about those mandatory meetings. I worked with an organization one time that wanted to do that. And they wanted to make it mandatory for the night shift. And I was like, well, wait a second. I'm like, would you ever come into my stress management seminar? At the time, it was a stress management at 2:00 in the morning. They're like, no, why would I do that? I said, then why are you expecting them to do it? And we kind of laid out other ways. We did a recorded session, and actually we broke it up in chunks. So every day, so they did, when the night shift came on, they had their debriefing meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So we broke up the session into, I forget how many minutes. It was like 6 or 7 minutes each day to go over the full session. That way they didn't have to come in at like 2:00 in the afternoon. I was like, what are you doing? They need to be sleeping. They don't need to be in here. So I think with the technology we have today, that whole thing of calling night shift in needs to stop. And I know it's really common practice in the industries I still work in. They still do it. And I think we just need to abolish that, because that's, if a day shift wouldn't do it, we can't expect the night shift to do it.
I think that's so well said. I get goosebumps. I was living there for so many years, but it's just so simply and brilliantly put, Laura. You wouldn't ask those day workers to come at 2 in the morning. And they're like, oh, in the boardroom, just yeah, just call me one. They have to go. They're used to it anyway. Whatever. It's like this one extra thing, and it's so beyond not being with a rat, right? It's such unrealistic, unreasonable request. And you mentioned the OSHA study about 6 and 7 hours. I remember the attending who gave that lecture showed a slide about your decision making skills when you're sleep deprived. And it was said like anything over 24 hours of sleep deprivation, your decision making skills was equivalent or worse of a blood alcohol level 0.08. So you'd be legally drunk, making choices. Like, would you allow a doctor to be drunk in the hospital? No, but we can have them do 40-hour calls. And there's so much of this institutional kind of, I'll say this, I've heard from other colleagues of mine in different places where they have these regulatory hours, but they're like, just go home and do your notes because we can't see you here if you're over hours. You're like, then give me less work to do. So I think calling it out is an important part, and then having those voices be heard. So it's important people like you are actually helping change the thoughts of those people making decisions, because I don't think they're malintentioned, but they don't realize how cruel it is what they're asking people to do.
Yeah, and I think, I think a lot of times too, we don't know what we don't know. So if we've never worked a night shift, if we've only been in the corporate office, we don't understand what the other side is dealing with. When I first started working, I was at an organization and one guy told me he was working a 36-hour shift. Now he's an electrician, high voltage. And I was like, what, a 36-hour shift? I'm like, what,
Mm.
do you go home? Like, how does this work? He goes, no, I am in the building 36 hours. And I was just like, and you're on high voltage line? Like, and no surprise, like the incidents of accidents were like through the roof. Well, no kidding,
Mm.
because but they had to do it like 2 or 3 times a year. And I was just like, and coming from the corporate mindset, coming from corporate wellness, I was like, this doesn't happen. This isn't real. And then you start, and it kind of goes back to that whole thing. Once my eyes were open, I couldn't turn away. Like, it was just like, there has to be a better way. Like, we cannot do this.
Yeah. Laura, what would you tell coaches who are working with people who are shift workers, what kind of mindset shift the coaches need to start changing, or what tools that they would need to start um, having themselves to really be able to serve the population? Because I'm sure a lot of us might be listening, like, oh, I might have done that when I had a client. I might have actually suggested, can we brainstorm an idea? Why don't you try yoga? Trying to lead into that one way. What do you think coaches need to fundamentally understand or shift also that we haven't talked about, or how they can actually practically put this into action with their workers or clients?
Yeah,
Sorry.
actually, absolutely. And I think I'm going to give you a resource they can go and download. It's called Coaching the Night Shift. And we're really talking about sleep on this one.
Mm.
But the the fundamentals of what we're talking about are really the same within everything. So I just went ahead and put that in the chat. And for those of you listening, you can go to lauratimbrook.com/night shift. But one of the things that we really need to start doing is listening. Like, really let go of I know what you need and understand them. One of the hardest things I found when talking with a shift worker is they don't tell you they work shifts. So it's important to ask them what their work lifestyle looks like. Or if they're a rotating shift worker, they only tell you about the day shift. They never tell you that, oh, and I also work these hours, because I've had so many people sit in front of me and they're like, oh, I work, usually it's 4 days a week. Sometimes it might be one Saturday a month. And I'm like, okay, well, what's your hours? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's all over the place. I was like, well, that's important for me to know. I need to know it's all over the place.
Mm.
So I think they've gotten so used to talking to health and wellness professionals and no one addressing that they don't work the typical 9 to 5 hours that they stop bringing it up. So ask about it and listen. Really understand what their struggles with. And one of the biggest questions I'll ask them a lot of times is, what is your biggest struggle? Like, what are you struggling with? Maybe it's food. Food's a big one. Not eating too much. I went into that first facility and I started seeing the guys walking in. I was like, oh, yeah, they're eating garbage food. But yet, when I talked to all of them, I can't tell you how many of them probably weren't even hitting 1,000 calories a day.
Mm.
And it all had the mindset of, does it look like I need to eat? And it's just like their stress level was so high. I mean, we have seen someone just sleep, just getting a little bit more sleep. They've dropped their A1C levels back into normal range, not doing anything else, just prioritizing sleep. And it's just it it amazes me. I guess probably at this point shouldn't amaze me anymore because it's been so common, but just the small changes and just listening to them and just not trying to take them to a place we think they need to go.
Yeah, yeah. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, how it's all one system, right? We think, oh, someone's overweight. What's the answer? Nutrition. It must be that they're eating garbage and they're eating too much and they're pigging out. Like it's natural for us to assume those things, right? That's kind of what we're taught and we're focusing on. But we know how important sleep is related to hormone regulation. Hormone regulation, stress levels, cortisol, how you metabolize glucose, and it was your A1C levels. And right, if you're in those, you're while a diesel truck or these high power lines, you might have a little more cortisol going through your veins to keep you safe, keep you alive in those things. And so, how do we focus on that from a different angle? And it even goes back to meeting them where they're at. That if we can, any one part of the system improve it, it can improve the other. And as you were saying that, Laura, too, I just got flashback to all the times I was in the ER because half the time I was eating while typing a note. And what are you eating? There's only cookies around, or just like, not quality, just processed foods. Or I'd go a whole shift working in nephrology. I'm like, I don't think I went to the bathroom in 12 hours. I'm working the kidney floor. I haven't drank water the whole time, right? And it's sometimes how these things are actually interrelated, right? Because you're not having a good shift. And I love eating. I'm not gonna lie, I love a good meal. But I remember when you're so tired, it was like food or sleep. I'm like, I don't remember the last time I ate. I'd just rather sleep forever. I don't care if I'm hungry. And your cues for hunger, I could notice were changing within me. Now, I've always been a lanky dude, but I was definitely not eating healthily, right? And so how much these things also are interrelated. What's available at 3 in the morning is not what's available at 3 in the afternoon, first of all. And people say, oh, well, just plan your meals out. Well, if I was sleeping all day, and we would joke around, the hardest thing to do as a doctor was go to the bank because you could, like during regular business hours, like you couldn't do, or go to the dentist, right? Like you just couldn't do regular business hours things. So really, if you look at it at a holistic perspective, it does affect so much of their life, and those with families, like, well, Diego, it's either me seeing my kids for a little bit to take them to school in the morning, or get a little extra hour of sleep, right? That we have to look at them
Yeah.
and what is important to them. And I remember being taught in medicine, ask a patient what they want, not what you think they want. And it's still something that's not intuitive because we're the expert. We know these things. What's their goal and their issue? So intertwined, Laura.
Yeah, and you make a really good point about relationships, and this is so missed a lot of times. When you work in corporate wellness, relationships, they matter, but not to the extent when you're working with a shift worker, because they're already feeling guilty about not being able to be with their family. And then you're asking them to prioritize their health. And they're like, why am I prioritizing my health when I've missed my son's birthday, when I've missed my daughter's soccer game, when I've missed Christmas morning? Like, these are huge in on that. So a lot of times what we try to do is we try to integrate whatever behaviors I'm a big fan of habit stacking. So if we can stack a habit to where they can build a relationship and get some workout, playing basketball with your kids, playing soccer with your daughter, or going for a walk with your wife after dinner, or your spouse, or something like that. If we can stack them, because relationships are so important, and there's just this heavy level of guilt that they're never going to be enough for their family or friends.
Mm, yeah, that hit me hard. Yeah, 100%. Because it's you're adding that shame and guilt. But talk about a restoration, right? We know one of the biggest predictors for well-being in general is social connections. So because of the work they're doing, because they may not want to be taking this night shift, but you got to put food on the table, right? And we talk a lot in coaching this idea of value conflict, right? People have heard of this. It's a important concept, right? People think value conflict like good versus bad, or superheroes versus villains. but often the value comes from things that are important to us. So one, this is a really good example. There's often a big value of, you know, putting food on the table. There's also a value of being at the table to to break the bread because of many factors. Sometimes those are in conflict, right? In order to put food on the table, you have to take that night shift. So not only is there's that guilt of not being available and, you know, having your kid be, please, mom, dad, don't go, and you're like heart's breaking there. But then also you're not getting all the time with your friends and family that does actively restore you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really hard conundrum, and it was that was to me so mind-opening when I started working with the differences from the corporate office to the shift work. Is it was a whole different ball game. It was just things that we took for granted that weren't even on the table for somebody working a shift. And how do you improve a relationship when they might not have time for, maybe both spouses are working shifts and they're just passing, like, it's sticky notes on the kitchen counter, and it becomes such deeper a deeper connection we have to look at. And it's kind of funny, I hate to say we push food and exercise and all that off the table, but in a way we do, because there's something so much deeper that we have to address, because food becomes, I don't want to say irrelevant, but kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. You know, and as you were, something you said earlier about the happy face and sleep, it just kind of came to mind too, is that, you know, when I was in residency, you know, as a second, third year resident, every 4 days you're doing 24-hour calls, no matter what you're doing. Sometimes you're doing nights also plus 24 calls. Like, so again, it's impossible to have the same sleep wake cycle. And I'm, again, consider myself very nocturnal. It's something we can, about 5 minutes, a few minutes left here. Maybe we won't get to that as much, but there's a big difference in how our culture views that. But I remember then noticing my own personality changing with a lack of sleep. That chronic exhaustion. I am a positive, I mean, I'm realistic, I think, but I'm a positive go getter, like passionate. And I was seeing myself turn cynical. Something I never experienced before, being short with people, or someone comes with it, I'm like, no, oh, who is that? That's not so. Even I just now even put together like how interconnected it all is. You don't sleep well, even if you want to be with your spouse or your partners in this, you may not have that capacity emotionally anymore to manage those regulations, because without good quality sleep, it's like, oh, when you're hungry, eat a Snickers bar, right? You're not you when you're angry. You're not you when you're chronically sleep exhausted too. And you even lose what your baseline is. So this is um wow. You opened my eyes,
Yeah.
Laura, to a lot of things in this conversations, to be honest with
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I always, as a health coach, you kind of meet somewhere where they're at and what they're ready to work on. But I mean, sleep, it's really the foundation. I mean, a lot of times, depending on what the situation is, we kind of use the analogy, we can work smarter or we can work harder.
you.
Like, smarter, let's focus on sleep and make everything else fall little bit more easily into place. Or we can work harder and we can try to force all these things, but you're still working on a cracked foundation. And, I think a lot of times it's important to acknowledge that, especially with a shift worker, because I mean, 4.5 hours is on average what I've worked
Yeah.
with these people. It's hard.
That's hard. And Laura, you know, really appreciate you being on here, illuminating this light of how shift workers, the differences, the unique circumstances. But the more we talk, I think the same principles actually apply to anyone. I think they're highlighted much more in shift workers because we see the dysfunction at the extreme levels. But everyone needs a social connection. Everyone needs a good quality sleep. Even that extra 50 minutes, right? How that influences your nutrition and your well-being and your connections and other parts of your well life. So I think even if you don't coach people on shift work particularly, talking to Laura, learning from her, she has continued education. And Laura, if you could maybe give us a little brief about what things you offer, give us your website in general. I know you already put a link there, but what else do you offer for coaches or even non-coaches to learn more about for themselves or those they serve? How can people find you and connect with you more easily?
Yeah. You can go to lauratimbrook.com. And for health and wellness professionals, we have all kinds of courses. We have the Shift HC, which is National Board approved for continuing ed. And that really is kind of diving into more of the statistics with shift workers, some of the more nuances. We go in much more deep than we did on this call about that. And then we have our better sleep course. This is really for health coaches that want to work with shift workers on better sleep. We go over 70 studies in this course and really dig down to practical application on how we can help shift workers get better sleep. And then we now have our corporate wellness blueprint that'll be released at the end of the month. And that's for anybody that's interested in getting into corporate wellness and how to start it off and how to do it. So we have all kinds of courses. And then, of course, I do a lot of corporate things, and I coach shift workers. So if you're a shift worker and you're like, hey, I need to do something, reach out. My website, it's all there. So you can find out, you can contact me and everything like that.
Well, Laura, and Laura, as you can tell, she's passionate what she does, and I'm glad the world has people like you to serve people who are otherwise underserved in ways that wouldn't think of otherwise. I want to definitely pick some of those up for myself to learn a little more. You've inspired me very much. So thank you so much, Laura, for being on our podcast. Really appreciate it. Hope to have you back soon. And thank you to all our guests, all our audiences. We'll put information how to reach out to Laura in the future. Any questions you have, reach out and we'll connect you together. Thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.